starting with light blue, slowly getting darker and darker. Isn't that marvellous? So hello, for quite a while now I have been looking for some cheap colours that I can just put in a sketchbook, just for some basic concepts. I'm not talking about fine art here, I just want some colourful sketches basically that don't look bad. So I tried out many different pens and markers and pencils and eventually I discovered these things. These here are watercolour brush pens that contain a dye-based ink. And I think these things are absolutely fantastic because they have on the end a genuine brush with real bristles on it. Can you see the bristles? Are they separating so you can... No, it's not working, is it? Come on, bristles. Show yourselves. Don't be shy. You'll just have to trust me on that one, I'm afraid. Anyway, the more I use these watercolour brush pens, the more I really like them. They've got so many advantages over other different types of markers. Now, to be honest, the first time I used these markers, it did not go too well. I was, kind of disappointed. Because I only like to use these markers on regular sketchbook paper, I feel no need to waste good watercolour paper with cheap markers, I prefer to get out proper watercolour paints. Oh wait, these are called brush pens, aren't they? It doesn't matter, you know what I'm talking about. But I have been practicing, and I've been getting better and better. So now join me as I redraw this scene here with this nice little trick that I learnt, which helped me get better a lot with these things on regular sketchbook paper. It's a very similar trick to what I've showed you before with these Faber-Castell Pitt Artist brush pens. They are pretty nice brush pens. They're more like markers actually. They contain pigment inks, unlike these things, which are dye-based, which has its pros and cons. But just inside a regular sketchbook, pigment inks seem to have more cons than pros, I think. I mean, if you were hanging it up on a wall in sunlight and everyone was looking at it every day, you would say, oh yes, I definitely want pigmented ink out of one of these pens. But they're very difficult to do blending with or anything of that kind. So here's an example of something I coloured in with these Pitt pens, and you can easily see why they should be called markers, because they leave marks all over the paper. You can see every single stroke because their blendability is abysmal. As soon as that mark dries on the paper, there's no chance of it going anywhere or blending in with the next mark, because the colours are made out of microscopic particles, solid particles. But these dye-based inks are not, so they're, a lot easier to blend. Still not perfect though, but it's better. Actually, the only part I didn't do with the Pitt pens is part of the trees down here. I actually did that with a pencil, but more about that later, because it's about time I actually showed you what this video is even about, yes. Now, if you think that the trick with these watercolour pens is to use them with water, well, let me tell you, yeah, you're too smart for this video. No, it's how you use the water. Let's show you. Okay. So what you do is that you get a piece of plastic, which, is a bit hydrophobic maybe. That helps. And then you start putting little droplets of water all over it. Yeah, put water on the thing. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And now, after you have your tiny little droplets of water, you can do tiny little dips, like so. And the water will gently soak up into the tip of the brush, and it will look like this. And this here enables you to do much lighter shades. And also gradients. Because here I've gone from a very light blue to a much darker blue. So let's give that another go. Tiny dip on the edge of the droplet, starting with light blue, slowly getting darker and darker. And now we can see here we have some darker sections where we've got some overlapping. So let's just add a bit more water to the tip of the brush. I've added quite a lot this time. And now we can just do some very light blending, and we can decrease that effect a little bit. It's also good to give your paper frequent rests and let it dry out before you start putting another layer of colour onto it. Otherwise your paper will just fall to pieces. But these watercolour brush pens are not very generous with the water that comes out of them, so that's why I use one of these instead of using, an actual brush filled with water, because these are designed to deliver lots of water. And then you're like, oh no, my paper's really falling apart, there's a hole in it now. Do a bit of a yellow sun. Now we're having a sunset over the ocean. Where does the boat go? There's a boat somewhere here. There it is. Now, to be honest, the nature of putting water at the tip of a coloured brush, which already has, colour in it, can be a tiny bit confusing at first, because you always have to start with your lighter shades first, which is very different to how you usually colour with a water brush, I find. It usually gets lighter, usually starts more colourful, and then it gets darker, It's a bit confusing. You always have to keep that in mind. It's, anyway. Mostly because I was used to painting with these things, a brush filled with water, and then adding colour onto the end of it. And when you're using these, you really have to then plan ahead if you're dipping it in a droplet of water, because you might, dip it too much and go, oh dear, oh that was too light. We might, dip it too little and then realise that it's too dark. It does take a little bit of practice, contrasting that with pencils where you can basically just select the intensity of the colour just on its pressure, and that's a pretty cool feature. In fact, pencils are really, really good. If these things didn't exist, I think I would only be using pencils in a sketchbook, for colouring in. The only reason why I like these more is basically because I just like the look of ink on paper, I like how it has that solid, intense colour. Pencils struggle with that quite a lot, Quite often the grain of the paper is going to show through somewhere, unless you get some really expensive and soft, some more oily based ones. But half of this drawing was done with some Derwent Studios, so that's basically as good as you wouldn't want to spend any more money on pencils just for a little sketchbook drawing, would you now? So anyway, I'm getting distracted. Where is the tutorial part of this video, you might be asking? Back to the watercolour pens. Another thing you can do with this water dip method, that's what I've just decided to call it. If you have a particular shade, like this, a particular intensity of colour, and you want to match it, simply, draw in circles until you match the intensity. So let's do that again. So tiny dip in water, little circles, keep on working it in. Oh yeah, that's about right there. Excellent. Paper gets tortured a bit with this method. With these watercolour pens, I would not use paper any thinner than 120 GSM. I think that would be a big mistake. Now you might be wondering, if you like ink on paper so much, what's wrong with alcohol markers? And I must say, I have used alcohol markers before, and I do think they are pretty good. Their blendability is fantastic. Your paper stays smooth and wrinkle-free the whole time. Unlike the watercolour markers, there's a slight amount of, wrinkling. Nothing that a flat bed scanner can fix. And the colours are nice and vibrant. But what I don't like about alcohol markers is that they stink. Like, not metaphorically, they physically stink. Can't stand the smell of them. Every time I use them, I'm just like, oh, how much isopropyl alcohol did I inhale today? I don't know. The other thing I don't like about them is that they bleed straight through the other side of the paper. Almost like a mirror image. So that's basically why I don't use them. Maybe I should use them, just wear a respirator and just only use half the pages in my bound sketchbook. I don't know. I mean, they are capable of some pretty good results, I must say. But because the ink in alcohol markers have no light fastness about them, just like these things, these dye-based watercolour markers, I see no reason why you'd want to make a masterpiece with them anyway. I think it's still a quality of ink which is only worthy in a sketchbook, you know? Or maybe you're just going to scan it and turn it into a digital artwork anyway, then you might as well just have coloured it digitally, and then, I don't know, things are real confusing. Anyway, just don't listen to that, because that's, this is art. Art isn't meant to be 100% logical. Anyway, now when drawing of these pretty cheap watercolour pens, I think they only cost like 50 cents each or something if you buy them in a pack. I would recommend you buying a large pack of them. That will make your life a lot easier, because unlike the alcohol markers, it is a bit harder to get a smooth, streak-free fill of colour, especially when you're doing that water dip method. So I would definitely get packs of these that have, at least 3 different shades of the same colour. So, 3 different shades of blue, 3 different shades of green, maybe even 4. Get ones with 4 different shades, and at different colour temperatures as well. The more shades you have, the easier your colouring will be. Don't hold back now. Oh, just get them all. Yeah. And so after you buy a few of these, just buy a pack of like 24 or 30 or something, and then you can just use that water dip method to basically fill in the gaps in between the different steps of the colour intensities, yeah. So there we go. From this to this. That's a bit of a difference. And I didn't even use that many colours in this one either. It was mostly just, the water dipping. I use individual droplets to make sure I don't mix up the colours. Did I make that clear previously? I hope so. Plus, you also need extremely small amounts of water to actually get that gradient effect. So that's why I use water droplets, yeah. To be honest, this piece here and this piece here are not an entirely fair comparison, because this one I drew like in the dark while watching the TV. And I just thought to myself, oh, these are watercolour pens. I can just, just do some scribble, and then I can blend it all again in later, with some water. But it didn't work that well. I needed an insane amount of water to reactivate the ink off the paper. And, I realised I'll just end up ruining my sketchbook. So that's why the water dip droplet method thing is a lot better in regular sketchbook paper. Okay. So now I finally managed to squeeze every tiny little point I wanted to make, and it took me a little while. I'm sorry. Bye.